Hey everybody, today on Codex History of Video Games, we talk about the Nintendo Famicom and the rise of a new video game company started by Chris and Tim Stamper as well as Joel Hoekberg. Enjoy!
Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I am Mike Coletta.
And this week we're covering Chapter 17 in The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen L. Kent. This one is called We Tried to Keep from Laughing. Ooh. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you. So, we talked about the fall of video games in 1983, and I feel like something very important to mention is that fall really only occurred in the United States. Video games were still doing very well in Europe and Japan. In fact, the Canadian market was doing super well all the way through 1984.
That's pretty crazy that even the Canadian market was okay, because I feel like those two things should be pretty linked, right?
Yeah, just eating poutine, playing video games, living the dream life. That's what they're doing. So now we got to talk about the next revolution in video games, the revolutionary console of 1983. And that console is the Nintendo Famicom. We're here, everybody.
We did it.
We did it. We got to Nintendo. I am so excited.
10 episodes in, 11 episodes in.
We're doing it now.
We're in the Famicom.
It was built around the 6502 processing chip.
That sounds awfully familiar.
Yeah, because it's the same. It was the cousin of the 6507 that was used in the original Atari VCS.
Okay.
Yeah, the main difference is because of technological advances at this time, Nintendo engineers were able to get a lot more out of the 6502 chip, mostly by just adding more RAM.
Oh, and I think they also had a dedicated picture processor, right?
Did.
So it had a graphics card.
It had a graphics card, which is pretty cool. In fact, in the book, there's a guy named Tom Zito they quote, and he just pretty much calls it a rewarmed VCS, but rewarmed, I think, really just sums up a lot more than they did a lot with it. It's not just rewarmed. They really went to town on it, I think.
There's a lot of advantages to using hardware that's been used in other things before too, because if you, especially back in those days when you were writing straight on the processor itself, basically it's so if you knew how to write games for the Atari 2600, you had a pretty good starting point for when you started making games for the Nintendo.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about how it had more RAM than the VCS. It also had a generated graphics processor. And this meant that it could also produce way more colors than before.
Oh.
I think it was it was not a lot of colors for the Atari. It was 16 or something like that.
Yeah, and 4 at a time or something.
Yeah. But this is could do a whole new array. It looked really good. We've all played a Famicom.
Yes.
By another name, which we'll get to later. But the Atari, another big difference with the Famicom was the controller. Because the Atari VCS had the joystick, you'd hold it, the base of the controller in your, my left palm, because I'm right-handed, and then you hold the joystick with your right hand. And this was, while you could control really well, was extremely uncomfortable. Also,
you really only had one hand that could do anything.
Yeah.
Because the other one was holding the thing.
I think it just had a button on top, too, right? Like a little button.
And on the side.
And on the side. That's the one thing it's been so long since I played an Atari.
Yeah.
So I need to play one again, I think. Is what I'm learning to become a proper video game historian.
The joystick I used to play Jaybird on.
Really?
It had 2 buttons on the top and a button. So it was like a square, right? Kind of rounded square. And it had a joystick in the middle with a button on top of the joystick. And then on the square above, forward, there were 2 things there. And then there was a throttle on the side too. A little tiny thing.
Jaybird throttle?
Yeah, I never used it for Jaybird.
You know why? Because that just starts all the hacks. That's where all the Jaybird hacks come from.
Yeah, well, I would obviously have kept it at full throttle all the time.
So you could hack that Jaybird. You heard it here first. But, well, as a professional Jaybird comedian, it's good to know... professional Jaybird player, it's good to know your setup and what you used, how your gaming setup was.
Yeah, the wire was really coily and plugged in.
You were doing that thing that Call of Duty players now where they have that controller with the paddles in the back.
Yeah.
But you were doing that with Jaybird way before.
Oh, yeah.
So everyone knows.
Yeah.
It's like when that kid had the turbo button on his N64 controller.
Or the slow motion button that just rapidly hit this pause button.
Oh, what?
There were a lot of, let's go on for a little tangent here. There were a lot of Nintendo 64 and Super Nintendo controllers that had a slow motion mode. And really all they did was spam the start button over and over so that it would pause and unpause a lot.
Oh.
And so you kind of got a little bit of a slow motion there effect. It didn't really... It was not helpful.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of did a thing.
It was just another thing that as a kid, you're like, this is so cool. Look what it can do. But it's really not doing anything.
Yeah.
The book also was the one that mentions that the stress that players put on the VCS joystick was not something that Atari had prepared for ahead of time. So a lot of times they just broke straight up. Famicom adapted their new controller, which had the plus sign control pad, the D-pad is what everyone calls it.
The classic D-pad we all know and love.
Yeah. That was actually created by Gunpei Yokoi, and he was the chief engineer at Nintendo, and he developed this in the late 70s for the Game & Watch series of LCD games. Mr. Game & Watch strikes again with the D-pad. Thank you so much, Mr. Game & Watch, for doing that. But the closest thing at the time to that controller was the Intellivision controller, which actually had a disc that players could move. It was like a flat disc. They have it now on, I guess it's kind of similar to a Nintendo DS, that like a joystick. It's like a flat,
I've never used you said Intellivision?
Yeah, I guess it's like a flat disc you move to control, but it kind of is like the disc they have on the Nintendo 2DS or 3DS, I think, where you move that disc around.
The PSP had one like that.
Yeah. Too. So that was the Intellivision controller, but the D-pad on the Famicom was just way more comfortable for players, and it was way more easily accessible.
They got a patent on that too.
On the D-pad?
Yeah, on that D-pad.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's why only Nintendo controllers had an actual usable D-pad for a long time. Although, I will say the PlayStation D-pad is pretty good too, but it's not the same thing.
Oh yeah, that's why, because the PlayStation had the 4 buttons. It wasn't an actual connected plus sign. It was like 4 buttons.
They're kind of connected.
Yeah, a little bit. Probably, yeah.
They're like connected underneath the plastic. It's like weird, yeah.
Strange. Also, the Intellivision controller had 12-button membrane keypad.
It just had like a 1 through 9, 0, pound, and star.
That's too many buttons. It's way too many buttons.
Yeah. Also, what are you using pound and star for in video games?
Just to make Twitter hashtags in your games. This is where Twitter hashtags came from. Yeah. That's not true.
It's so weird to think, because back then they had to basically make these controllers like before the games existed, because in arcades they were making controllers for the game, right?
Yeah.
Like you could custom make a controller for the game. You're making a console that has lots of different games. You need something that's sort of universal, and without the standard that would be set later by the Famicom, like, what do? You just throw a bunch of buttons on a keypad, I guess, and hope that it's good.
Hope for the best.
It's clearly wrong to us now, but back then they didn't know.
This is also kind of jumping ahead a bit, like you said before with the arcade games. A lot of those arcade ports were failures because the controller that was used in the arcade game worked the best for the game. There's an example of a motorcycle game, I think it's in the next chapter, where the port for it failed because it just didn't translate well, the home console versus an arcade setup where you're on a motorcycle, which makes you feel all cool, you know?
Yeah, way cool.
Also, the Famicom had 2 buttons to simplify that. So they had a D-pad and 2 buttons. The release of the Famicom did have some problems. The first set of consoles released in Japan had a bad chipset in the original design, which caused games to randomly crash for no reason.
Oh, no.
Yeah, president of Nintendo Limited, Hiroshi Yamauchi, who we mentioned before, he decided to recall the entire first shipment of Famicoms and replace the chips. This cost them a ton of money.
Wow.
It was described in the book as a small fortune. No specifics on that. I wanted specifics, but it's fine. I get it. And then, and this is actually straight from the book as to why Yamauchi did it. He said, Yamauchi decided that protecting the Nintendo name was more important than preserving the initial momentum of his sales. And boy, oh boy, do I wish companies did this now.
Yeah.
When we get to Xbox 360. When we get there.
Yeah. I wonder if there are companies that make decisions like that too, where they go, it's more important to us to protect the brand. And then like something happens and they never, like, protecting the brand means nothing because they ended up not being able to sell the thing. You don't know about those companies because those companies are the ones that failed and we never heard about. So
but this is Nintendo doing the right thing. And even with that setback, Famicom in Japan was a ginormous success. Nintendo sold more than 500,000 Famicoms within the first 2 months of launching the system in stores. And Yamauchi quickly set his sights on the US market. But the question was, how can you break in to a market where all of the press is saying video games are dead?
Yeah, and Nintendo hadn't had a whole lot of success outside of Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong's what broke them into arcades. Yeah. If they didn't have Donkey Kong, they might never have gotten there.
Yeah.
So his answer, though, to this question was Atari.
Oh.
Yeah, Yamauchi told Howard Lincoln, who is now vice president of Nintendo after working with the Nintendo of America with the Warner lawsuit, the Donkey Kong lawsuit. to contact Ray Kassar at Atari in early 1983. And I just wrote a little note in here because I think it's really fun how these are also connected.
Yeah.
Like we ran into it with Jack Tramiel buying Atari. Later, it's after this point, we kind of jumped ahead. But it's just a small circle of like 10 people all doing stuff in video games this time. Lincoln's call came to Kassar 4 months after, Kassar, not Kassar. I always want to say Kassar. Kassar told investors they were not reaching their sales goals. Warner stock was currently in decline at this point, and Kassar was also fighting accusations about insider trading, which we discussed in an earlier episode, where he said it was for a separate project, but really
it didn't look good.
It didn't look good. He sold stocks at a bad time.
Yeah.
Lincoln's offer was pretty straightforward. Atari had the license to sell the Famicom under its own label, so they didn't even have to call it Nintendo, in every market except for Japan.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was worldwide. Except for Japan, they could sell the Famicom under the Atari label. Nintendo would receive royalties on every unit sold and have unlimited access to sell software for the system. So that is the deal right there.
Dang. That sounds like a pretty sweet deal for Atari.
It's a no-lose for Atari because what Nintendo didn't know at the time was this is right around the time that General Computer was making the Atari 7800 for
General Computer.
The best. They're my favorites because they made the boards and now they're just they're crushing it. General Computer.
Really rising in the ranks.
You're the best. Never change. And then, so they were working on the 7800. So either the 7800 does well and Atari just says, who cares about the Famicom? We'll just push the 7800. Or if the 7800 bombs, now you have yourself an insurance policy to sell the Famicom and make your money back and recoup your investment. So this is a great deal. Warner picked up Howard Lincoln and Minoru Arakawa, the president of Nintendo America, whose name I was trying to remember before, in a private chartered plane from Seattle to Sunnyvale, California, where the headquarters were. And the meeting went well, and everyone was there. Even Warner Communications president Steve Ross showed up at one point to shake their hands and be like, this deal sounds great. We're super into it. And Nintendo was treated super well. They only had some trouble negotiating the price and then showing off the system. They were trying to do that. But the deal never went through.
Oh, why not?
What tore it apart was the Coleco Atom computer. Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
When it debuted at the 1983 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, the Atom was playing Donkey Kong, which Nintendo...
because they had the rights to Donkey Kong.
Yeah, which Nintendo licensed to Coleco before, and Kassar sent... I always want to say Kassar. It's fine. I'm over the name, okay?
All right.
I apologize to Ray.
Probably neither pronunciation is correct.
Yeah, we're probably it's probably like Kaser or something, and we're just saying it wrong. I'm so sorry, Ray. Forgive us. He angrily sent a message to Yamauchi, Arakawa, and Lincoln, claiming that Coleco's use of Donkey Kong on the Atom computer breached the licensing agreement Atari had made with Nintendo for the home computer rights to the game. So Coleco had the right to use Donkey Kong
for the
cartridges.
ColecoVision.
Yeah, cartridges. And then Atari had the right to use Donkey Kong on a floppy disk. It was all home computing.
For a computer, but the Atom computer used cartridges.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a weird line.
So this is where it's weird because to mend this, Nintendo calls a meeting with Arnold Greenberg of Coleco, and Yamauchi, the president in Japan of Nintendo, essentially just put on a show, angrily yelling at Greenberg in Japanese, saying they don't have the computer rights, and it's like an intimidation tactic, essentially, to make Greenberg fold, and it worked. He folded. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But really, if you look at the agreement, Greenberg did have a legal argument to put Donkey Kong on the Atom because it was on a cartridge. Yeah. The Atom took game cartridges.
So did they... Yeah, I guess they didn't specify that it was a difference between a home console and a home computer. And how do you even quantify that difference, right? Yeah. They both use microprocessors. They both have monitors. They what's the difference between a computer and a console, especially at that time, right?
Yeah, especially, look at it now.
Now that line is very blurry.
Yeah, but so Greenberg folded, but this still wasn't enough to save the deal between Nintendo and Atari. And the reason for that is Ray Kassar was fired from Atari a month later.
Oh.
So even though they did this to mend it, it still wasn't enough. And
he was the dude,
he was the guy pushing the deal because he was trying to save his reputation and Atari's, but he was fired. So now let's talk about Nintendo Co. Limited. That's the parent company of Nintendo America, the one that is run by Hiroshi Yamauchi, president at the time. And he was not known as being a chill dude. Yeah, he was. I think his business style was described as imperialistic in the book, and he was very. He never complimented anyone.
Oh, he was.
But he was very fast to reprimand people if they screwed up. Like he thought, I am paying you to do this. Why do I need to compliment you? This is a job.
I want to say thank you to you. You're doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I'm paying you money. The money is the thank you, I guess.
What's the quote that Jared says in Silicon Valley? He's like, we deserve no thanks for doing what we ought, for it is our duty, or something like that.
Oh gosh, I love that show. He was especially hard on Minoru Arakawa, who was his son-in-law, who ran Nintendo of America, and he had a lot to say to him about the Atari deal falling apart. But with the Famicom selling still amazingly in Japan, by this time it's 18 months later, and they had sold more than 3 million consoles.
They're really crushing it.
They're destroying it, yeah. They needed to get it to the US market, so they decided to try it again in 1985. And Yamauchi decided that they didn't need any more partners. We're doing this ourselves. This is going to go into this market as a system made by Nintendo of America. And the best place to debut electronics in the 1980s was the Consumer Electronics Show, or CES, which still happens today. It happens twice a year, once in January in Las Vegas, and then once in June in Chicago.
I think it's only once a year now.
Now? This was in the 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s it was twice a year.
And at CES, it's all electronics. That's important to note. It's microwaves, whatever.
Yeah, it was E3 before E3 as far as video games were concerned.
That's actually, in the book, it says that video games were kind of looked at as the ugly stepchildren of the industry, and that's a lot of the reason why we have Electronics Entertainment Expo, or E3 now, because video games are like, we don't need you, we're going to do our own thing, and that's why E3 exists. But at this time, they're still going to CES.
They still needed CES.
Yeah, they needed it. So companies often spent a ton of money at these shows. They would pay like $1 million for the booth, and then $500,000 for the private party afterward. It was a big deal. It was a big marketing thing. Every company was doing it. Arakawa decided to introduce the Famicom at the January 1985 show in Las Vegas. He changed the name of the Famicom to the Advanced Video System, so the AVS, to appeal to American consumers. And I'm guessing if you know anything about what we're talking about, you know that doesn't go well. They had a small booth at the CES show, and they had the Famicom, but it just had an AVS logo over it. It just covered it up.
They were trying so hard to not say the word video game.
Exactly, yeah. It had a keyboard and a music keyboard, and then 25 games it could play. They really brought a lot.
Yeah, and I mean that's what Famicom is family computer, right?
Yeah,
it's like, they're like, this is not a video game, this is a computer. It's a family computer.
Family computer. Everything's fine. The show did not go well. Arakawa manned the booth himself. He manned it. And while people liked the quality of the games, they're like, oh, this is a good build quality. No one placed any orders to buy it. There was actually a quote in the book.
Did they do any sweet hotel room deals? I guess not.
No. I mean,
that's the secret.
Everyone we talk about in this is really bad at secret hotel room deals.
Yeah,
that's why Tyler and I are really good at it.
Right, we're really good at secret hotel.
We're the best at it. All right, already sounds shady. In the book, also they mentioned how someone was quoted saying Arakawa looked very confused the whole time, like he's just sitting at the booth. Because if you've ever been in a booth anywhere, it's just awkward. It really is. Manning a booth is a weird thing to do. Yeah, I don't like it. Lincoln and Arakawa regrouped though and decided that the best way to sell the system was not as a video game system. Like we mentioned before, the word video game is poison at this time. No one wants to use it. In fact, it's weird because the press is also like that. They say they're always talking about video games, the great crash of video games. This is a horrible time. So what Lincoln and Arakawa decided to do is change how they market the system by adding some new features. Enter the Zapper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Nintendo Zapper Gun. Nintendo had arcade versions of two successful shooting games at this point. One was called Hogan's Alley, which was actually featured in the movie Back to the Future. It's what Marty McFly's playing.
He's super good at it.
He's very good at it. And the second was Duck Hunt.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And Nintendo decided to include the Zapper and sell it as a gun game instead of a video game. I don't know how this makes it a big difference, but apparently it was big enough. I thought... Yeah. They also included, and this is what makes it really different, a little robot named Rob, the remote operating buddy. And he was kind of terrifying. I looked at his pictures. He made like really weird grindy noises when he moved, so it was like little haunting. But when the screen changed, he reacted, so it was kind of cool.
Like so he knew what was going on.
Yeah,
he could like play games with you.
Yeah, really, he was a decoy to make the video game system not look like a video game system, and that's what he was there for. And he did his job tremendously.
All I know about Rob is he was in Star Fox games, at least in Star Fox 64. He's Rob 64, and he's like telling you what to do.
Yeah.
It was a great reuse of that like sort of character.
That is great. I think Rob should come back.
Yeah.
I'm ready to have my own remote operating buddy hang out with me, help me go to the grocery store. Remember?
They should have included it with the NES Classic.
Oh man. We both looked up and stared at his NES Classic, just like, oh man.
So cool.
Yeah, I do think that Rob, it is just kind of a cool thing because when you're a kid, you always wanted your own robot.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's the reason that I just love robots. Okay. They also did another name change. They changed it from the Advanced Video System, too close to video games.
Yeah, too close.
To the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. We finally made it.
Yes.
We're here, the original NES. The booth at Summer CES, this is in Chicago, was larger than the one in January, but still smaller than most booths. They decided to use Rob as the center attraction, and it did better this time because people were like, oh, look at this toy. It's got a shooting game.
Video game.
What's
Definitely
a video game? It's an entertainment system. It's fine. But again, they still had no orders.
It also kind of looked like a VCR, too.
Yeah, it did look like a VCR.
You front-loaded the cartridges. Like, they really went hard to make it not look like a video game system.
Do you think they had some guy at CES just blowing in the cartridges to make them work?
Yeah, probably.
That'd be awesome.
Hold on.
Hold on.
Press a button.
And so now we got to put a pause in Nintendo for a bit.
Okay.
So, because after the CES show, RoccoW decided to do a consumer market test, and those were also very disappointing. And I think it involved little kids being like, "I hate this. This is the worst," and it just dissuaded him. And it was a very low point for RoccoW at this time. Like he already had a pretty crazy run with Nintendo of America, like getting Donkey Kong into arcade machines, and then getting sued by Universal for Donkey Kong and that whole thing. So he's been through a lot, and this is when he thought of backing away. But we have to put a pause because we're going to link this back and talk about a person we've already actually mentioned on this podcast before named Joel Hoekberg. And we mentioned him in Chapter 1 because he was the guy that actually was attacked by people for working on coin-op games because of organized crime. Remember this?
Yeah.
He's back.
He's not dissuaded.
Yeah, no. By 1983, he had been working in the coin-op and arcade video game business for 27 years.
Oh, man, he's a veteran.
Yeah, when we mentioned him, he was a repairman in 1956 on novelty games and then on pinball machines. But then he worked his way up and became an executive member of the team at Allied Leisure in the 1970s, working on games. And Hoekberg traveled a lot to like Japan and Europe to attend trade shows. And at these trade shows, he met in England two brothers, a man named Chris and Tim Stamper.
Oh, yes. I love these guys.
And Chris was an electronics genius. And at 19 years old, he was a game designer for Xylec. And Tim, his younger brother, was also a genius. And he was 16 when Hoekberg met him. And he was just a school person. He's in school. That's what he's doing. Hoekberg said that even at 16, Tim had an eye for what was good in gaming. Like, this is a good game. A bad game, what sells, what doesn't. These kids are obsessed with games, and it's important to know that. This was at the end of the Space Invaders era, and Allied Leisure had just been bought by Century, so Hoekberg decided to start his own business. He's like, I'm doing it for myself. I've been doing this for 27 years.
Let's do it.
Let's do this. I'm paraphrasing. We don't have quotes about it.
I got my buddies Chris and Tim.
I'm just getting in the mindset of Hoekberg. I'm getting really excited. Okay, so him and the Stampers, because the Stampers also wanted to leave the Xylec company and start their own company. So 3 years after meeting Chris and Tim, Hoekberg decided that he wanted to start his own business. And then also the Stampers were like, well, weird. We want to start our own business too because we want more creative freedom and larger rewards. That's what we're all about right now. We want to be rewarded for the work we do. And Hoekberg was like, you know what? You should stay with Xylec. You're very young. Like I think 3 years later, he's 22 at this point, and he's like, I want to branch out. And Hoekberg's like, we gotta take it easy, you know. You just stay in your job. You're doing great.
Baby, just get that pension.
Get that money. And then he was like, no, I'm Chris Stamper, and I want to do this on my own. I'm just paraphrasing.
It's not a direct quote.
No, I'm just really getting into the characters right now. That's what's going on. And so once he saw there was no changing his mind, Hoekberg was like, okay, Chris, let's do this. And Chris and Tim Stamper and Joel Hoekberg made a partnership. And Chris and Tim specifically set up their own company called Ashby Computer Graphics and began to publish games for a tiny little computer called the Sinclair Spectrum.
That was big in Europe.
It's very big in Europe. That's right. Yeah. It was actually never really caught on in the U.S., but it sold like hotcakes in Europe.
Yeah.
Which sell good. Who doesn't like
hotcakes
pancakes?
Sell really good.
That's right. And that's why. But
those and gangbusters, right?
The gangbusters, hotcakes, man, there's flying off the shelves.
Yeah.
But that's why you never heard of it. It's a very big European computer, but not really a lot in the U.S. And then one of Tim Stamper's first games he ever made was called Jetpack. And this game was a huge... this was his first game, I think, Jetpack. It was a huge success. So about 1 million people owned a Sinclair Spectrum computer. 300,000 copies of Jetpack were sold. So 30% of people bought his game.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So towards the end of 1983, Hoekberg went to a show in Tokyo. And while he was there, he saw the Nintendo Famicom for the first time. And he's like, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
This is it. This is the future of video games.
I'm on board.
I'm 100%. He was so on board. He bought a console in Tokyo and sent it back to Europe to the Stampers to see what they thought. And the Stampers were like pretty reluctant at first. They're like, I don't know. We just kind of want to make computer games. And then after a lot of pestering by Hoekberg, they were like, okay, fine. We'll design games for the Famicom under the condition they started to sell this system in United States and European markets. Because at this point, it was just sold in Japan still, right? And there wasn't a lot of of any Famicoms anywhere but Japan. And so they wanted to have their games be seen by people. I'm guessing that's what it was. So
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. In order to make products for the Famicom, the Stampers needed system specs and, more importantly, a license from Nintendo. You had to have a license to make games for Nintendo. We're going to get into that next chapter. But it's a
big part of why Nintendo was able to do the things they did.
They did a lot of quality control through that, too. Yeah. But luckily, Hoekberg was already familiar with Nintendo of America, and he made an appointment with Minoru Arakawa and flew to Redmond, Washington to propose a partnership. And I love what happens next, because Arakawa's like, all right, you say you can make games. Make me something for the Famicom. I'm not going to give you any of the system specs.
Oh, no.
You just have to know what to do. And so they had to reverse engineer the Famicom. The Stampers did. They had to take it apart, find out how it worked. And at first they designed like a demo. It wasn't a game, just like a demonstration for them. And Arakawa liked that, but he's like, you know what? Make me a game now. And so they made him a game for it too. And because they reverse engineered it, Chris Stamper said that he actually thought they had more advantage over their competition of other people working in Famicom because they found stuff that wasn't even listed on the official Nintendo system specs.
Oh yeah, they had figured out the tricks.
Yeah, they had some insider information by taking that thing apart.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so this gave him some advantage. And then Arakawa told Yamauchi at this time though that he didn't want to do any more CES shows.
I'm out of the game.
I don't want to do this anymore. He was like kind of resigned to the fact that video games were dead in America. And then Yamauchi was like, no, calling baloney on this. He says, the Famicom is literally gangbusters, hotcakes flying off the shelves in Japan. It is crushing it right now.
We can't sell them. We can't make them fast enough.
It's going to do well in the United States. I believe in this system. Let's sell it. And that's when the Nintendo Entertainment System was brought to the toughest market in the United States, New York City.
Oh, and
for the holidays.
If you can make it here, kid, you can make it anywhere.
Exactly. The Big Apple selling video games. But yeah, so that's where we leave off. This is the end of Famicom Part 1.
Man.
Because next week we really get into them trying to sell it.
Yeah.
And we get into them starting to pick up some steam a little bit. But we wanted to leave a little teaser. They're going to New York. Picture like the beginning of Die Hard. But there's just a van full of Nintendo Famicoms driving into New York. No terrorism, just a van of Nintendo Famicoms driving into a warehouse.
No one knows.
No one knows.
No one has any idea that this is going to be the coolest thing they've ever
There's
seen.
a bunch of kids sleeping, not realizing that they're going to have their minds blown in a week and a half when they see these wonderful Famicoms on shelves. Man. Get ready to play some Duck Hunt.
That's one of those things that like I really wish that I could do a time travel. Just go back to like 1986 and just hang out in New York City and just not have any effect on the world. Just be there when things like the Nintendo test market happened, right?
Oh,
Go be part of that.
Oh man, I'm excited. I remember still getting my Nintendo 64 Christmas, waking up, opening it, seeing the box.
Is that video of you?
Oh, I mean,
Nintendo 64.
I wish that was me. Oh man, that would be my #1 trip to fame.
Oh man, yeah,
yeah. I'm unboxing N64, kid. You didn't see that? Oh, sure. Here's $1 million. That's how the entertainment system works, right?
Yep.
Entertainment system, industry. Sure, we're doing it. Point is, next week we're gonna get into those sales in New York. We're going to get into some other games, and it's going to be really good. But yeah, this is Famicom Part 1. Tyler, what have you been playing?
Still Destiny.
That's true, but we've been playing it together.
Yeah, because you got it on PC now. We finally got
PC. Tyler and I bonded over a raid.
Yeah, we raided last night. We had a great time for the most part.
It was really good. I mean, and we got lucky. We found our friend Chris was in it too, and then we found some random people on Discord that were really awesome. We went through Leviathan in 1 hour and 55 minutes, which is pretty good time.
Pretty good. Yeah. It's for especially because we had one person who'd never done it before and 3 people we had never had to coordinate with before.
And then me, who's a complete klutz on a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn. It's tough. There's some embarrassing jumping moments. I just think what happens is I get stressed and I double tap spacebar and then my guy shoots up in the air and then I die.
Oh, yeah. It's hard. But yeah, so we had a lot of fun doing that. Played a little bit more Splinter Cell Conviction, John Wick Simulator 2010.
Nice.
I'm definitely really leaning into John Wick Simulator now.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you can play it. It's stealthy. It's not very good. The controls are really clunky in that game. They made a lot of changes from the Splinter Cells before it, and they're not that great. But the storyline is kind of cool. Because you're his daughter's been hit by... In the game before, his daughter is hit by a drunk driver or something, and it turns out it was not just a drunk driver. Yeah, and so in the
spoilers, man.
So in this one,
this old game,
yeah, in this one, you're out for revenge. This is Sam Fisher's off the grid. He literally says these words. He says, "I'm out of the game." When they try to bring him back in, he literally says, "I'm out of the game."
Is this where they switch voice actors too?
No, that's in the next one, in Blacklist.
So this one you're playing is Conviction? No.
Yeah, Conviction.
Conviction, yeah.
Yeah. And so the storyline has been kind of cool. It's a little bit more personal than any of the other Splinter Cells have been. Because the storylines in the other Splinter Cells are just I was a terrorist. We gotta go sneak in and not so we can get them.
It's time to be real sneaky and stuff. We're going there.
We're gonna do it, and it's just backdrop for these sneaking missions, right? But in Conviction, it definitely feels more this is a driving force of the game itself. The people I'm sneaking up on and executing John Wick style are people that I'm oh yeah, these are people complicit in the murder of my daughter.
And you care. And you're into it. Nice. I like how you get into it, Tyler. You're just full in. I like that.
Sam Fisher's great. Big fan.
If you don't know, right now, Tyler's wearing all black turtleneck. He's got night vision goggles on, and he's holding a silenced PP7 from GoldenEye. It's really hard to do a podcast with someone holding a gun, but we're doing it.
Yeah.
Because we're committed to this podcast, and we're committed to you, listener.
Yep. And I'm committed to Sam Fisher and GoldenEye.
That's true.
So, but other than that, that's all I've been playing, really. I did pick up Horizon Zero Dawn. Haven't popped it in yet, though.
I fixed my Trello board.
Oh, yeah.
So I got some stuff ready to roll.
Post your backlog.
Oh.
But you should link our backlogs in the show notes.
Oh, we can do that. I actually started filling up my backlog with games I've beaten, even going back way too far. I put Oblivion and Morrowind on there because I'm you know what? Might as well.
Yeah.
I want to know. And so, but I'm also playing Pokemon right now.
Oh, yeah.
Ultra's of Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And I am just working my way through I like the trials system. Because in Pokemon Sun and Moon, instead of doing gym battles with the gym leaders, they do these trials with the kahunas on each island. And I like that better. Because they're not just necessarily fight a bunch of smaller Fisherman Joe or whatever their name is, right?
And then get their phone number and then you call them later.
And then call them and be like, hey, man, I'm sorry I beat you that one time. Can I have more money? Yeah. So it's I did the water one and you have to clear the fish out and they move downstream and you're on a Lapras and you go downstream with them and then you fight the totem Pokemon at the end as the boss, which is kind of fun. That's cool. It's just a big version of a Pokemon that I've never heard of because I don't know this generation at all. I'm learning as I go along. It's exciting. I don't know if I'm going to fill that Pokedex up though. That's daunting.
There's 700 Pokemon.
It's so many and it's a lot of trading, but I've also been really enjoying the Wonder Trade system because there's this YouTuber guy that's just sending people treasure Pokemon. They have to be hacked. They can't be
sure
real.
They are, but you have plausible deniability when you get it through Wonder Trade.
It's a Wonder Trade, so I'm like, I'm not going to research it at all. But
I'm not cheating.
I got a Deoxys level 100. I can't even take it out of the box and try to battle with it because I feel like it'll run away from me. I don't have control.
It doesn't trust you.
It doesn't trust me yet. My favorite thing about the Pokemon games, though, is you can open the Pokemon up and you can like pet them and they like purr and they're all happy. And it's really weird how much joy I get out of that. But I'm just like rubbing my Rowlet, just like, you're the best owl grass thing ever.
Oh, yeah. In X and Y, they called that Pokemon Ami.
Pokemon Ami?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Because it's like a French themed.
Is the whole
X and Y is all French themed, yeah.
Oh, whoa. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Just like how Sun and Moon are
Hawaiian themed.
Yeah.
Alola. It's like they didn't even try. Yeah. It's fun though. I'm looking forward to playing through more Pokemon games, but I think after this I'm going to do the new Super Mario Brothers 2 on my 2DS.
Oh yeah.
Because I just love a good old-fashioned platforming Mario. Yep. Big into it. And we're actually going to talk about Jumpman more.
Jumpman.
Oh, you getting mushrooms next episode. With the more I'm just excited. I'm excited we're into it now. Tyler, we're into Nintendo.
Into the NES.
Our childhood, getting into the modern times. I like it. I'm into it. I'm excited.
We're going to have a lot of fun once we hit the Super Nintendo mark. Super Nintendo N64 mark.
Sega Genesis.
It just gets better. I just get real excited thinking about it.
We also get to talk about a Sega console next episode, too. We get into our first Sega console, so that'll be good. And is there also, I should say thank you if you rate and reviewed and subscribe to us on iTunes or your listening vehicle of choice. But if you haven't done it yet, we'd really appreciate it if you left a 5-star review. It helps us out a lot. We're trying to get the word out about our fun little video game history show. And I'm on Twitter at @mecoletta. Tyler's on Twitter at SneakerElf, ELPH.
Yeah.
That's how it ends. And then you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. And that is all. Thank you so much for listening. And you want to say bye, Tyler?
I will say bye, Tyler. See you next week. On the Tyler Mike Talk Show.
Talking about video games.
Talking about fire team medallions.
Talking it up.